Woodlands, and welcome back to Get Me a Library. Today I'm doing a book review on The Light Between Worlds by Laura Weymouth. This is my first book review in a while. What it is I'm reading Harry Potter at the moment. I'm doing that Harry Potter book club with Get Me a Library thing. So I can't read more than one book at a time. So some lovely people on Bookstagram created a group, and I will tag her here, and she created a group to do like a readathon, and we do this every so often. So last time the theme was orange, blacks and yellows on a book cover, so I was actually reading Goblet of Fire at the time, so I just continued to read it. This time however I had different prompts. There was 5 prompts, and one of the prompts was full colours on a book, and this is very full coloury. So I put Harry Potter to the side, which is Order of the Phoenix at the moment, and I picked up this book and read it on my first prompt, and I thought, thank you, because now I can do a book review. I just feel silly reviewing a book that every single other person pretty much in the whole world has read, and it's just going to literally be me talking about something that you already know, and it literally defeats the point of a book review. Whereas at least with this one, some of you may have read it, but there are a lot of people out there that haven't. So I've forgotten how I do my book review, so I'm just going to do it how I want to do it, and if it's not how I used to do it, please let me know and I will do it how I did it before. So as far as I remember, I basically introduced the book. So this is what I got on my book box club last month, I believe, and it was called Fantasy Lands. That was the theme. And this is based on 2 girls and their brother, and Fantasyland and modern day wartime. So, how do you live in one world when your heart is somewhere other? 6 years ago in wartime London, 2 sisters, Evie and Philippa, were transported to a magical realm where they became woodland queens. Now returned to the real world, they must come to terms with more ordinary lives. For Evie it's unbearable. A patchwork girl pieced together from pain and longing, she dreams of the whispering trees and daisy chain crown. For Philippa it's a relief, especially now she's met Jack. But all it takes are 4 words to shatter Philippa's newfound peace. Your sister is missing. As the weeks unfold, Philippa must discover if Evie crossed safely between the worlds or if the light was too bright and she fell. I'm just going to move my camera down because I'm getting a neck ache from looking up. As Vista would say, that's better. Okay, so that's what the book is about, and I really did like the idea of it. I love anything to do with wartime London, and for some reason I always just think of Doctor Who, and it had Christopher Eccleston in it, Billie Piper was in it, John Barrymore was in it, and it was the episode Are You My Mummy? I always think of that, and it's one of my favourite episodes in Doctor Who. So yeah, I always think of that, and then I always think of like things like my nan when she was in wartime London, and about Winston Churchill and the Queen, and I love all that. It's my history, it's my country. So when I ever get a book that's a bit like that, I fall in love with it instantly. So I did my book report like I used to do back in the day. So I'm going to give you a quick summary of that, and then I'm going to tell you what I thought of the book. So the book is called The Light Between Worlds, and it's by Laura Weymouth. It's 401 pages, and it surprised me actually because the writing is pretty big. It's not tiny writing, and some books I've read with really tiny writing, a bit like Court of Thorns and Roses, it's not really tiny writing, but the writing's a lot smaller, and it's sort of about the same sized book. I don't know how many pages this book would actually be if it was smaller, maybe about half the size of it. So I did think I was going to read this a lot quicker, but I think maybe, well, I'll explain why I couldn't read it as quickly. But let's just quickly look at how beautiful this book is. Like, I don't think you can see a more beautiful book. You can tell me some other beautiful books, but it's still beautiful. So it's 401 page long, and it's sort of like a YA fantasy contemporary book. I wouldn't say that it was a complete fantasy book, because when we are in the fantasy world, there's not enough of it for me to sort of really be satisfied with how fantasy it was. So I would say that it had a slight fantasy element to it. I mean, I would describe it kind of like if you've ever watched Goodbye Christopher Robin. When you see yourself as Christopher Robin, everything you see is this magical fantasy adventure, like it's all make-believe and you've made it up and everything is real to you, and there's talking bears and talking donkeys and it's just magic for you. And then obviously there's the present day where it's not, but the whole sort of book or film, sorry, has a sort of magical element to it. I would describe that as like this. When you go to the magical woodland, it's magical. I mean, there's a stag that talks. There's like, you know, woodland creatures and stuff. But there's a lot of it that is in present day that kind of makes you, I don't know, there's not enough of this fantasy element for me, so it's very almost fantasy, if that makes sense to you. If it doesn't, please let me know below and I'll try and explain a little bit better. I started on the same day and finished it on the same day, and I'm giving it a 2-star review. Remember, my reviewing system is different to others, so if you get a 1-star, it's a poor book. If you get a 2-star, it's an okay book. 3 stars is not a bad book. 4 stars is I really liked it. 5 stars is amazing. And if you get a love heart, you've exceeded the 5 stars, and I absolutely loved this book. So I got to about halfway, and I have the page here exactly, 316, chapter 48 or whatever it was, and I just couldn't read any more. I powered on through and I finished it, skimming quite a lot of the book, and at that point it was already a 3-star in my head, and then when I got to the end, because I couldn't read it, it made it a 2-star. So I have to sort of give it a 2-star going on 3. So the setting is wartime London in 1944. It then jumps to 1950, where it's present day for them, whereas the 1944 part of it is sort of like it's a memory, it's a flashback. So if you think about Narnia, when they go through the wardrobe, and time, you know, can go on for a very, very long time. They can live there to be 1,000 years old in a wheelchair. They walk back through that wardrobe and they've only been gone 5 minutes. So the reason when I say present day, I don't mean present day now. When I refer to present day, I refer to 1950s, the day that they're sort of speaking in this book. Okay? So I'm not too sure about the time in the Woodlands, what sort of decade it is, but I would assume it was something maybe like medieval kind of times, because they don't have technology, they don't have mobile phones, they're not in the 80s or 60s, so I'd have to just describe it as sort of like King Arthur, sorry, that kind of time, where, you know, round tables and stuff. So that's how I would describe that time. So the main events on this book is it's wartime 1944, the bombs are going off everywhere, and Evie wishes to be anywhere else but there. She imagines this forest that they went to with her family. She just imagines to be anywhere but there. And all of a sudden, they're anywhere but there, and they are in this woodland, and this great big stag is coming towards them, like Bambi's dad, and he comes over and speaks to them, and it's sort of like Narnia in the sense where they're suddenly like, oh my god, these are going to be our kings and queens, and that's how the story starts. So the most exciting part for me was the idea of going to this woodland place. I honestly thought this was going to be way more fantasy than it was, so the idea of it really excited me. When we were in the woodland areas, it was still exciting, but I will sort of explain all this in a minute about why it wasn't as fantasy as it could have been. So I did stop, like I said, about chapter 48. I will get that up here so you could sort of see how much I did read. So 48 is basically here. So I did sort of read this much, and I did really sort of struggle with the ending. The book is split into 2, so it does have Evie's side, and then it does have Philippa, so this is basically here. So Philippa goes from here, so it's just under halfway of the book. so I did make it to the other half, so I was really happy with that. So the summary of the book is it's sort of Narnia, okay, but I didn't understand what the hell was going on in the Woodlands. I just didn't get it. The book was about something else entirely, meaning that the book wasn't about fantasy and it wasn't about the woodland creatures and stuff. It was basically just about a hidden meaning about sisters and their relationship. And there was nothing wrong with that at all. I just think that it was it made me think it was more of a fantasy book than it was, so I was disappointed in that. It does have a fantasy land in it, so it is right to say that there is fantasy in it. I don't know, it's just, I'll explain. I found that although I've already said I felt there wasn't enough detail in the woodland, I didn't understand why they're in there. Let's just forget about that bit for a second. Once you were in that woodland, there wasn't enough of it to really grasp you into that setting, but there was enough for you to want to know a little bit more, because you're like, why are we in a woodland? Let's find out more. You were then suddenly in present day, and you're like, okay, fine, continue. You then continue to read it, and then there's not enough for you to continue to want to read that chapter, and then all of a sudden you're in the woodland again. And it does that for probably, I think it was about 10 chapters or something, 11 chapters, 12, it gets to about 25, and it sort of stays where it is with a few little flashbacks, and then it sort of goes on to Philippa. But there wasn't enough of the woodland for me to completely understand what was going on. Now, I know that you don't want to know everything at the beginning of a book. No matter how much you say you don't, you do kind of want to a little bit, but at the end of the day, you don't want to know everything in the first few chapters, because what's the point in the book? If you imagine Harry Potter, it shows you something at the beginning of the book. You don't really know anything more about it. Like, why is Hermione going into McGonagall's office? Why is she getting around to every class on time? You only find out about the time turner until the very last few chapters, and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, there's a time turner. If you knew about that time turner at the very beginning, the whole rest of the book wouldn't have made sense, because Harry would have said to her, why can't we use that time turner for various events, okay? And it's only because Dumbledore sort of mentions it that Hermione thinks, damn, I can use this time turner, I'm allowed to. So you don't want to know everything at the beginning of a book. However, because the chapters were so spaced out with the whole woodland element of it, there wasn't enough for me to truly be able to say I know what's going on in this woodland. So this is where the spoiler comes in. I'm trying not to do too much of a spoiler, because if you do like the sound of this book and you do want to try it, I don't want to give everything away. But when they first arrive in the woodland, there is a war going on, or there is about to be a war. So Evie, Philippa and Jamie, the stag service is saying to them that they are going to be able to sort of stop this war from happening. So that's, okay, pretty much what he says to them. The next few chapters, it reminded me of Narnia in the first book or the second one, when they're basically sort of preparing for battle between the White Witch, and it sort of made me think about that. There's another king or a prince of another sort of realm within the woodlands who wants to take over this woodland and sort of like get rid of the trees basically for whatever purpose he has. This is sort of given through each chapter, and it's only until the last chapter of the woodland that we realise why it affected Evie and Philippa so much, and why Philippa really wanted to leave the woodland, whereas Evie still wanted to stay, even though it made sense for her to have left. You don't really get that until one of the last chapters of the woodland. And like I said, there's 11 chapters pretty much, until 15 or whatever I said, until it tells you, it goes on to Philippa. I think I said 25. 25 chapters. But it's not 25 chapters, it's half of 25, because half of those chapters are in the present day, whereas the other half is in the woodlands. So it's very, it grasps you and then you're in another world. It grasps you and then you're in another world. There wasn't enough for me to have really liked those chapters. We then get on to the chapters with Philippa, and there is still a few of these past things where we find out more about why Evie and Philippa had to leave, but then it's all pretty much present day, and it bored me. Like, I don't mean to be rude about Philippa, but it just bored me. Like, Evie wanted to stay in the woodland forever. Philippa didn't want to, she wanted to go home. Although Evie wanted to go home and see if her family were okay, because Service said that time is completely different, her family won't know that she's gone, they will be okay. So if you imagine them being in the fantasy world, time has just paused wherever she was from, in London, and time can just continue and they will go back, like Narnia. So imagine that's, you know, everything that happens. Philippa only says that she'll stay to help them, and then once they've helped them, we'll go back home. When they go back home, Evie never wanted to go, so she's suddenly been taken to this place, loved this place, and then been brought back. She's still half in and half out. So when it gets to Philippa, she never wanted to stay there. She talks about basically how much she loves where she is now, and not what she did before. You know, she did, every time she talks about it, she didn't really like it. Whereas with Evie, did like it, and because I feel like there was something missing, I preferred Evie's chapters. Whereas because Philippa was literally just a straight line, she didn't really like that world. It just made me not like Philippa, because at least Evie took me to a fantasy world. I don't know. This book is very confusing for me, yet it's really not. So I have to rate it 2 stars. I think this is the only time I've ever rated something so low on my YouTube or even on Goodreads, really. I think it just disappointed me. I think I expected something to be so much better than it was. I expected, even though there was a hidden meaning behind it about the sisters' relationship, I just wanted a fantasy world. I mean, maybe it's because I was reading Harry Potter, but I don't think it is. I'm just thinking, if you compare it to things like, oh, I don't know, Alice in Wonderland, okay? We don't see much of Alice's world before she goes into Wonderland, other than sitting with her sister. But even if you watch the film by Tim Burton or anyone else, like, when she is in Wonderland, she is in Wonderland, like, she is there. Percy Jackson, this is my example, Percy Jackson. So we see Percy Jackson living in America. We see exactly what he goes through in life. We've got his mum, we've got his stepdad, we've got, you know, Grover, who is, well, if you haven't read Percy Jackson, I'm not going to tell you who he is just yet. But you basically have all of that, and then all of a sudden he goes into this magical fantasy world. I know he hasn't gone through different realms or anything, but he's gone to Camp Half-Blood, and suddenly there are Aphrodite's daughters. There is the daughter of Ares. He's standing there like, I am the son of Poseidon. I live in a Poseidon's house. Like, wow. My brother is a Cyclops. If you didn't know about that, sorry, spoiler. This didn't have that. It didn't give me my fantasy world. It just gave me a woodland that didn't make any sense, with a stag that was like, hey, I'm basically Aslan. It just, I don't know, it just didn't make sense. I feel like I'm being really horrible about this book now. I'm really, really sorry. But I don't know, it just didn't make sense to me. Maybe I'm a little bit too old for this book. I don't want to say that. I'm not too old for this book. But no, I've read other books from Book Box Club that have been my age. Well, they're not, they're young adult books, but they've been something that I really got and I really liked. Like The Wicked Deep, like One of Us is Lying, these kind of books. I've got it. So I'm not saying that this book isn't my age. It's nothing to do with Book Box Club. I'm just saying that they've picked other books that have been my thing, and they picked this book. So I don't think it's an age thing. I think it's just, it didn't really make sense. So thank you guys for watching my book review. I'm sorry it wasn't a happy one. I'm sorry it wasn't a really good one. I feel really, really bad, like, I don't know. But I'm really, really sorry that it wasn't a good one. If you did like this book though, please comment down below and let me know, because I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you agreed with me, again, let me know your thoughts as well. Like, thumbs up, which is the same thing. Thumbs down if you really want to, although I don't want a thumbs down, so ignore I said that. But please like and subscribe to this video if you like fantasy books. If you liked this review, if you didn't like this review, still like it. No, I'm joking, you don't have to do that. But no, I'd really appreciate if you could like and subscribe to my channel. But yeah, thank you again for watching my review on The Light Between Worlds. But again, look how beautiful this cover is. Like, it's really beautiful. And there wasn't enough water wartime London as well. That's another thing. There was a little bit, but not enough. I wanted more wartime London. Things a Bright Girl Couldn't Do. I read that and I loved the wartime London aspect of it. I know it's not fantasy, I know it's different, but yeah. There wasn't enough wartime in this and there wasn't enough fantasy. It was basically just the 1950s. Nothing wrong with 1950s, but it wasn't enough for me. So yeah, thank you and I'll see you guys soon. Bye!